Hello. This week, no discoveries, so I'm afraid we'll have to address skullduggery within the antiques trade. And I know you're throwing your hands up and saying, Michael, that can't happen, surely. They're all good, honest people. And yes, I'm sure most of them are, but there are a few rotten apples, and it's time we tip them out of the barrel. And we're going to look on this occasion, because we haven't got forever, at Vesta cases. This is what a Vesta case is, if you don't know. It is a box for holding matches. They came in around the 1840s. The very first ones were snuff boxes that were adapted to... They held the matches fine. You didn't have to do anything to a snuff box to put matches in it. But all they do is they add the strike for the matches on the back of the snuff box. More often than not, that's a soldered strip of ribbed metal. Or, very crudely, and this sometimes you come across this, someone has just engraved a series of lines one way and then the other to make a rough surface. If you've got a snuff box, a Victorian snuff box, or Georgian one, even it happened to some Georgian ones, that has got this later strip on the back of it, or this horrible engraving, and have been crestfallen ever since, take some comfort in the fact that in a sense, these are the very earliest Vesta cases. But of course, ingenuity doesn't hang about. And very quickly, we get the dedicated Vesta case, which is usually a thin, slim box with a sprung lid. It's got a little strip of metal there and a little, so it snaps shut. And they all would snap shut. And the reason you had this case in metal, and you get lots of them in brass as well, thousands of the bloody things in brass, is that the matches sometimes went off of their own accord. So if you've ever lit as a child, a mischievous child, if you've ever set fire to 20 matches all at once, you know, it goes whoosh like that. Now imagine that happening in a cardboard box without any warning, in the middle of your trouser pocket. It's a trip to hospital. Maybe in the Victorian period, you go up like a candle and that's it. So they were very practical things, but they then, as is the way with everything, they then became items of status, of ornamentation and of decoration for gentlemen. And they will often have original suspension rings, sometimes at the top, if it's that sort of design. Often on later ones, this is Edwardian. This is the first piece of silver I ever bought. I know, humble beginnings. If they're Edwardian, they're on the side, and you'd hang them off your watch chain. So they had to be a little bit decorative. But in the main, when I was a lad, they were all plain. And I've looked around, and there don't seem to be many plain Vesta cases about anymore. And there is a reason for that, and that goes back to the rotten apples. But first, this one is Edwardian. It's always, well, almost always, hallmarked on the inside lip. And, not that people pay attention to this, you will get part marks in the cover. You might just be able to see two little black dots there, which are actually the standard mark and the date letter, in this case for Chester 1905. By this period, if it's decorated, it's often engraved. This has got foliate decoration, back and front, and often as you get a little reserve for somebody's initials. There are other decorative forms, many other decorative forms of Vesta cases. They proliferate, all sorts of materials. But two ways, other than engraving, that they are mostly decorated is either they are die stamped with decoration of a standard form. So you get, very famously for a production of Charlie's Aunt, a series of Vesta cases were presented that were die stamped with the actor who played Charlie's Aunt at the Edwardian Theatre. And they're stamped out and given out to members of the audience, members of the cast, backers. I don't know, there seem to be a lot of them about. Otherwise, you would die stamp two sections of a decorative form, and the rarest one I've ever had was the head of a salmon. And both parts of the decorative head of the salmon were stamped out of two pieces of silver and soldered together. There's also a version where it's extruded, which is the seamless It's a late modern patent, the seamless Vesta case, so it has no seams, so when the matches go off, it doesn't, possibly blow up. So that shows you how violent these explosions used to be. But you have die stamping, and that's a mass-produced technique, even though a lot of these designs are now rare, and it's mechanical. So it's not hand chasing. It should be very regular, very even. They're usually quite light as well, because you've had to use a thin gauge of metal to stamp out the sections. The other way you can decorate them is to enamel them. Now, I don't have an enamel Vesta case to show you. The main proponent of enameling was Samson Morden. He got into a lot of trouble with artisan enamelers at the end of the 19th century. They objected to his work being called enamel because it wasn't really. And just so you know, that sort of enamel decoration, this is a little Italian pillbox or some such with the arms of the Peruzzi banking family. That's an aside. But this is the sort of work that Morden produced. What it is, in effect, is a layer of white enamel, plain white enamel, very quick and easy to fire, done and dusted. And then instead of building the colours up with numerous firings, with all the hazards that each time it's going to go wrong, none of that at Morden. On the white enamel, they then simply paint a scene. Very quickly done, freehand painting. They then seal it under a layer of clear enamel. That's then fired, that sandwiches the painting, and then they polish it down. And so basically, it's much quicker, much freer process, and you can do all sorts of designs without really worrying too much, which is why there are hundreds and hundreds of different designs of Samson Morden Vesta cases, railway tickets, visiting cards, hunting scenes, coaching scenes, vehicles, the very famous sentry boxes, where actually the silver box itself is in the form of a sentry box, and then the different guards and regiments are enamelled inside as standing to attention. There are hundreds of the thing, probably even thousands if you looked into it. But they're not true enamel. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, because of this technique, they made the cases slightly thicker. They dug out the silver surface to accommodate firstly the layer of white enamel, then the painting, then the clear enamel on top to be polished flush, as with this. I can run my finger over that, and there is the most imperceptible little bump with the enamel, but if that was Morden, there wouldn't be. It would be dead smooth, absolutely dead smooth. The problem is these enamelled Vesta cases are extremely valuable. A little plain silver one or an engraved silver one like this, 30 or 40 pounds. An enamelled one, if you had a Vesta case with a scene, say of a rare sentry box, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 pounds. A coaching scene, a rare railway ticket, 1,500, 2,000 pounds. Lots of money are at stake. So unfortunately, where our tale of skullduggery begins is about 30, 35 years ago, with a few people getting hold of genuine plain Vesta cases and cleaning them off, making them absolutely nice and smooth and taking all the dents out, and then enamelling, laying enamel on top of them, because of course you can. And often they're game birds at this period. So they put game birds in the late 80s, early 90s, they're enamelling game birds onto them. The only problem is the Vesta cases they're using aren't thick enough to cut back the surface to make that enamel flush. So when you see these, and if you see one in a picture, it will look good. You'll look at it and think, oh, that's a lovely enamelled Edwardian late Victorian Vesta case. If you held it and you ran your finger over that enamel, you would feel a speed bump. You go, whoop, bump, and down, because it is another layer on top of the silver, a distinct layer. That is how you tell those forgeries. They're quite well known in the trade. I think even by the time I was working at Sotheby's 25 years ago, we were turning them away because we knew all about them. Subsequent to that, I think people lost interest in doing that sort of work. It was quite expensive to do it. It was quite skilled to do it. It still paid, of course, when they managed to take you in. But then subsequently to that, in about 10 or 15 years ago, lots of plain silver Vesta cases disappeared from the market. I've just noticed it's quite difficult now to find a plain Vesta case, whereas years and years ago, you would stumble over, dozens a week. They all went off to the Far East or the Middle East or India to factories. And the first thing that they did was they stopped enameling them, but they put cast silver figures. So the same game birds, hunting hounds, hunting scenes, royal figures, they would cast them in silver, pure silver, standard silver, and they would solder them to the front of genuine Vesta cases. So when you looked at them plain, they would have this lovely soldered silver decoration to the front of them, all cast in detail, and they would have the correct hallmarks. The problem with that is, and I wait for someone to correct me, that's a Vesta case aficionado, genuine Vesta cases almost never, plain silver Vesta cases never had applied silver decoration. If I were to see applied silver decoration on an Edwardian or Victorian, otherwise plain Vesta case, I would run from it with my hands up in the air screaming. There's lots of these things about. I don't think there's any need for someone to buy a dubious example. So I would steer away from those. And the last one I saw that I knew was an absolute howling fake was on the website As Sold. This is about 5 or 6 years ago, of a barter dealer who wasn't a specialist in silver, it must be said. And I think he bought it because he thought it was country or sporting pursuits. And it sold for high hundreds, nearly £1,000. And it was a 20 quid Vesta case with a silver salmon soldered onto the front of it in India, probably not much before the chap actually sold it. I don't think he did anything willfully illegal, but buy from specialists. There's a warning for you. Also now you get exactly the same thing done with pretty naff enamel or glass or porcelain buttons, and you see them in auctions up and down the land. Excuse me, my leg's gone to sleep. Up and down the land, and again they are just soldered on, and you can see the rough solder. And even if you can't see the solder, nothing should be applied to the front of a Vesta case. If they're novelties, they're made as novelties. The salmon head I had was die stamped as a novelty. Nothing was cast and applied to it. The enamel ones by Morden, and even by the people that copied Morden and produced them in Birmingham, like Turner and Simpson and Henry Clifford Davis, when you get these enamels, they should be flush to the surface. They should not be raised up. A little bit of damage in a corner that's been retouched, that's fine as long as you're paying a reduced price for it. And do look for restoration, because enamel Vesta cases were something that a gentleman carried with him almost daily, and they got knocked and they got bashed and they got chipped and they got cracked, and people have become very adept at restoring the corners of them. But there's always a slight tell in the colour. It may discolour over time. And remember, the way that these were made, they were flooded over with a clear sheet of enamel, and then it was polished back, transparent enamel, polished back. So it should be like a skating rink. It should be a frozen pond. There should be no flaw or imperfection or bump or lump in it. And if there is, worry and run away. But lots of these Far East and Middle East and Indian fakes have been coming over now for 10 or 15 years, and I see them everywhere, and people sell them everywhere. Maybe the cast silver fakes, and I must say everybody in the silver trade knows this. I'm really talking to either new collectors or to dealers who don't deal day in, day out with silver. But most dealers in the trade know this now and steer well clear of them. But, you know, just be aware, because you're more likely to come across one of those at the moment than you are a genuine Vesta case. And collecting Vesta cases can be fun. They're wonderful objects, but it's not very wonderful if you buy one for many hundreds of pounds and find out it's a £20 bit of tat that somebody's messed about with. Rant over. Well, a salutary warning. I hope I haven't spoilt anybody's tea. I hope they're not going to have a look at their collection and see a salmon leaping in cast silver on a Vesta case they've just bought. Take it back is my advice. Get them to watch this video first and then tell them to take it back. Anyway, until next week, and hopefully I will turn something up, but it is the quiet time, so I might have to find something else to rant about. But until then, good antiques hunting and goodbye.